Hey you, are you wasting your time on social media again? Your brothers and sisters in Islam Net from Norway are establishing a masjid, a dawah center. Establishing a masjid to convey the message of Islam is one of the best deeds a Muslim can do. There's a huge need for it in Norway. You know this and I know this. So that makes the reward even greater. So give generously and Allah Azza wa Jal will give you even more. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. How are you guys doing? Right-wing proponent Nigel Farage, who was known for a single issue, which was Brexit, has now started to veer into different directions and has, for some reason, started to comment on Muslims in Britain. Let's take a look at some of the comments that he's made recently and come back and respond in kind.
We have a growing number of young people in this country who do not subscribe to British values, in fact, loathe much of what we stand for. So what do you do?
Who are we talking about there?
Oh, I think we see them on the streets of London every Saturday.
What do they look like? Oh, we're talking about...
What do they look like?
Are we talking about Muslims here?
We are. And I'm afraid I found some of the recent surveys saying that 46% of British Muslims support Hamas, support a terrorist organisation that is prescribed in this country. So we've been, you know, and what's interesting is that this Prime Minister is building up far more of that population than anybody before in history.
Now, many things have been said by different people, proponents of media, and I've been following some of the comments of, you know, some right-wing people who have actually said, quote unquote, well, tell us what he said that is wrong. I mean, he's saying that Muslims in this country, who, let's say, constitute about 7% of the country's population, that Muslims in this country, in the United Kingdom, they don't respect fundamental British values, and that something needs to be done about this. And he cited, as an example, the amount of Muslims who supported the proscribed terrorist organization in the UK, Hamas, as evidence for this. Now, the first question is, what are fundamental British values? Fundamental British values are 5 in number. They are the rule of law, tolerance, democracy, individual liberty, and respect. These are the 5, bog standard, if you like, British values that you have in national curricula all around the country and that are taught to students in this country. So if we ask the question, is it the case that there is something inherent about the religion of Islam or about the Muslim communities, or is there sociological evidence to suggest that those 5 aspects are in all respects rejected by the Muslim community? I would say that's actually an inaccurate statement. Let's take the first thing, democracy, for example. Democracy, by the vast majority of traditionalist Orthodox Muslim commentators and scholars, is considered to be acceptable if used instrumentally. Of course, it's not seen as an objective truth in and of itself. I mean, Plato himself had issues with democracy, and there's philosophers, even in the Western tradition, that had issues with democracy as a system, as an objective truth, or as a pragmatic usage. So democracy, it's not actually correct to say that, well, Muslims reject democracy and all the results of representative democratic processes. So I don't think we can put that aside for now. Second thing you could say is respect. There's nothing in the religion of Islam which indicates that respect is to be forgotten or is not to be upheld, in fact. And this is a very subjective term. What do we mean by respect? But if you're asking the question about Islam and Muslim people in particular, there's nothing there to suggest that. Number 3, if you talk about tolerance, well, I mean, there are many verses in the Qur'an which state quite explicitly and quite candidly that people can live in whatever or using whatever system they want to use for their life, whatever worldview they want to use. For example, lakum dinukum waliya din, in chapter 109 of the Qur'an. You have your religion, we have ours. فَمَنْ شَاءَ فَلْيُؤْمِنْ وَمَنْ شَاءَ فَلْيَكْفُرْ. Whoever wants to can believe, and whoever wants to can disbelieve. Or it's mentioned in chapter 2, verse 256, that لا إكراه في الدين قد تبين الرشد من الغي فما يكفر بالطاغوت ويؤمن بالله فقد استمسك بالعروة الوثقى. That there is no compulsion in religion. This is Islam. Islam does in fact state that, we're not meant to convert people forcibly in this way. So if we're asking, does Islam practice tolerance? Yes. You'll say, of course, some people say, well, you guys don't actually have tolerance towards the LGBT community or this community or that community. Well, in the British context or in the context of the Western world, there's no scholar or reputable scholar across the world in Islam that says that there shouldn't be, or there should be some kind of intolerance practiced against members of communities which we disagree with the practices of, for example, LGBTQ communities, etc. So I don't think there's enough evidence to suggest that on a sociological level, on a classical Islamic level, that tolerance is not upheld in Islam and or by Muslims in the United Kingdom or anywhere else in the West. What about individual liberty? Now, this is connected. Obviously, liberalism with a small l as an ideology, as something I've spoken about at length, is not something which is compatible with Islam in the broad sense. But individual liberty, if we're talking about people to choose whatever they want in the Western context, once again, there's no scholar worth his salt or her salt that would say that such a thing is, we should rebel against it in the Western context. So really and truly here, and rule of law, of course, rule of law, scholars are very explicit at the fact that you should obey the law of the land so long as it does not contradict Islamic law if you're living in. So you could make the argument, actually, that fundamental British values from one angle or from one respect, it's not something we are in opposition to from that perspective, from the pragmatic or contextual perspective. Of course, if you go deeper, you could say there are points of tension as an objective reality. So that's one thing. Then he cites, 46% of people believe, he says, 46%, Muslims believe or support Hamas. Well, I just looked at a study done by YouGov, which is seen as a reputable and credible organization that says that of the people that support Palestine in Britain as a whole, 14% of them actually supported Hamas. Now, that can't be constitutive of the entire Muslim population because there's only 7% of Muslims in the UK, which shows you that there are people who support Hamas who are not Muslims in the United Kingdom. This is unusual, you could argue, because it's a proscribed terrorist organization, but suffice it for me to say, it's not a proscribed terrorist organization in the majority of the world. I mean, Hamas is not, this is a fact. Majority of countries do not consider them to be a proscribed terrorist. In fact, Switzerland for the longest of time, and Norway for the longest of time, these are European countries, did not consider them to be terrorist organizations. I think they may have changed that recently. But the point is, just because something is seen as a proscribed terrorist organization, it doesn't mean to say that the people who support that group are necessarily against fundamental British values, the like of which we've just mentioned. It's actually conceivable that someone could make a case for Hamas as a non-proscribed terrorist organization, which many have, and still claim at least to uphold fundamental British values. That's the first thing. The second point, which is very important, is that the same tensions which may exist with the dominant ethic of the West and Islam could also said to be existing within Judaism and the dominant ethic of the West, which is, say, liberalism, classical liberalism. So if you wanted to make a case about Muslims because of lack of integration, say, or opposition to what you consider to be fundamental British values and or the dominant ethic of the West, then you could say the same thing about Orthodox Jews. And this is something that Abdullah Andalusi recently came on GB News and done a fantastic job in being able to expound on in great detail. And you can see his video in the link below. And that is enough of a sober analysis for us to say, I'm sorry to say, Farage, you have not been able to make the case in a strong enough manner. And to specialize this, to make it a remarkable case of the Muslim community and peculiarize and otherize the Muslim community above and beyond other communities like the Jewish community or other communities, even maybe the Sikh community, Orthodox Sikh communities, and other maybe even evangelical or Christian communities within the West, I think speaks volumes about your disingenuity, and it speaks volumes about how you perceive Muslims in this country, and it may even speak volumes about maybe who could be, and this may be a question I should ask you is paying you. Who's paying you to speak like this? Because back in the days, you and Robinson and others used to all have this very patriotic, pro-Britain approach. And it seems to me the balance is changing, isn't it, Nigel? Now it seems to me that you're more concerned with Israel and foreign politics than you are with national politics of Great Britain. That's what I will say. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Your brothers and sisters in Islamnet from Norway are establishing a masjid, a dawah center. This center, this masjid, this educational institution will act like a beacon of light, calling the Muslims in Norway back to the essence of Islam. So give generously and Allah Azza wa Jal will give you even